What's up guys, Caleb here with another installment of Reality Check, and today we have an updated MSI laptop to talk about. It's the GP75 Leopard, the 2019 edition. Let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. Let's get the specs out of the way. Our review unit is running a 9th gen i7-9750H, which is a beast of a processor. It's also coupled with a GTX 1660 Ti, which after using it on this laptop, I found out is actually a dank ass GPU as well. All of that is paired with a 512 gig SSD, a 1TB HDD, and 16 gigs of RAM. So that's kind of the sweet spot for mid to entry level gaming. So with those specs, I was expecting good performance, and I have to say I was not disappointed at all, maybe even a bit blown away. But let's touch on some other aspects of the laptop before we get into that. I feel like MSI has kind of taken a slight step backwards with this new updated Leopard. I mean, for the last 2 years, we've seen them kind of migrate towards thin, sexy, sleek devices, but since they've introduced the Prestige lineup, which has effectively split their two target markets, we're now seeing them step towards the gamer aesthetic once again, and I have to say I'm just not a huge fan of it. Overall, it's not a bad look though. The lid of the chassis is fairly minimal. The only kind of standout thing here is those trademark MSI angular slopes on the top of it, but once you open it up, you're kind of bombarded with all these angled slopes and like these weird geometric patterns, and then also a weird decision for a silver finish on the inside of the chassis. It kind of makes it feel a bit mismatched. Now, if you are a gamer, or if you're just not like me and you're not all about minimal, sleek, sexy, then I'm sure this will be absolutely fine for you because it doesn't look horrible. It's just not really my speed. On to other things. The keyboard is really nice. MSI is kind of well known for making decent keyboards with great travel in their laptops, and the GP75 Leopard is no exception. It's got a really nice deep press. The membranes actually feel quite tight, so it takes a lot of force to push it in, but overall I really like the feel of it. The layout is also really well done. They haven't actually minused any keys from the setup, but it doesn't feel like it's too cramped. The last thing to mention is that the keyboard is fully RGB and 100% customizable using SteelSeries engine, and whilst it isn't the best software, it has some bugs here and there, it is pretty functional. The mousepad is okay in most aspects. The surface of it is quite smooth and it feels responsive enough, but I'm not too crazy about the dedicated clickers. I don't know, that's just me. But overall I think it's okay. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not the best MSI has ever done. The screen, as is typical with a lot of MSI laptops, is just so dank, man. 1080p resolution, great color accuracy, great viewing angles, really thin bezels, and then to top it all off, 144 Hz. Say no more, bruv. Please, calm down. Get out of here. Leave. Leave. The speakers are actually surprisingly decent. Now, they are by no means the best laptop speakers that I've ever heard, but they crank out the volume to some serious levels. The actual tuning of the sound is not that great. There's a heavy lean on the mids, no real bass, and the trebles like to distort at super high volumes, but I was still decently surprised. It's actually okay for media consumption and for gaming. The port selection on the Leopard is actually fairly minimal. It's got everything you might need to plug in all your gaming peripherals and an extra screen and what have you, but it's not crazy with the port selection. On the left side, you have your mic and your 3.5 jack inputs, as well as an HDMI, display mini, and one USB 3.1 Type A and one USB 3.1 Type C port. On the other side, there are two USB 3 Type A ports and a full-size SD card reader, which is a nice addition, but there's not a whole lot happening there. Anyways, that's pretty much all the basic things that you might want to know about this laptop, but let's move on to performance, because this is where you really start to see the value that this laptop has. All those powerful components, bruv. Let's start off with an open world game like GTA 5, which might not be the most recent of titles, but can still be fairly taxing on a mid-weight system. So everything maxed out to ultra, we were getting upwards of 60 frames per second with an occasional dip below, but it wasn't really noticeable. Considering that it's a 1660 Ti, that's really solid. Everything maxed out. If you optimize the settings just a little bit, it doesn't even take a whole lot. Drop them down to high. I was getting upwards of 144, no problems whatsoever. So that's really good. Rainbow Six Siege is a more modern game, so it's obviously been better optimized and it runs better with more modern graphics cards. So everything maxed out to ultra, including the HD texture pack, I was getting upwards average of about 100 frames per second. So that's really good. Drop that down to high or very high, just optimize the settings a little bit, and you can very easily achieve 144 frames plus, no questions asked. The next game is Apex Legends, which has been surprising me over the course of this last 3 months because we've been using it on a bunch of different laptops, and it's actually quite a taxing game. So everything maxed out on Ultra with the 1660 Ti, we were getting about 90 to 100 frames per second, which is really impressive. But even dropping it all the way down to its lowest possible configuration, we only got about 120 to 130 frames, and even then it was quite inconsistent. PUBG is a game that's come a long way in terms of its optimization, and they've made a lot of fixes to it, but it still seems to be quite taxing. So we were getting maxed out settings, we were getting about 80 frames per second, little dips here to 70, a couple of rises to 90, but on average, it's sitting comfortably at 80 frames per second, which is again, really good performance. If you wanted to get into that 144 Hertz realm though, you'd have to keep your settings all the way on low, and even then you're only going to be capping in between 120 to 130 frames per second, and it's quite inconsistent. Battlefield 5 was the true test for this game, and everything maxed out on Ultra, minus DXR, that was obviously disabled because we're not running an RTX card. We were getting upwards of 75 frames per second, averaging at about 80 with occasional dips back down to 70, which is really, really good for a maxed out modern game with a 1660 Ti. That's not bad. If you wanted to get into that 144 Hz area though, you're gonna drop everything to low, and then maybe you'll be sitting in between 130 to 140 frames with some serious dips. It's gonna be quite inconsistent. Do not try putting DXR on though. You will literally face a hit of about 50 frames per second. So if you're playing on ultra maxed out setting, that's gonna take you all the way down to 30. No one wants that. No one wants that. So in terms of gaming, I honestly think this is one of the better cards that Nvidia has on their lineup at the moment. It's actually much more affordable than any of the RTX cards and still gives you dank performance for the price. Like, it's a good card, people. Moving on to the more professional tasks, things like editing, Premiere Pro, Cinebench, all of those things, it did as well as you can expect it to with its current hardware. The 9th gen processor really kicks things up a notch as opposed to the 8th gen, so render times are really, really decent. Editing inside Premiere Pro is also really simple and smooth. If you're editing off your SSD, grading, playing back 4K footage at full quality is no problem, and that's kind of the test for us here at Reality Check because we're always working with 4K footage. Render times are also perfectly acceptable. You won't be waiting hours and years in order for your renders to get done because it's a decent machine. Now, it is all good and well that it performs this well because really it does perform amazingly, but the real question is, does it stay cool whilst it's managing all of this amazingness? Not really, I'm sorry. With regards to the fans, they are cack loud when the PC is running at full tilt. It actually is a thing with MSI laptops. Their fans do really crank up the volume, but it's because this puppy can get seriously, seriously hot. So when the CPU is under a full load, you're going to be averaging in between 85 to 95 degrees over long extended periods of usage. The GPU is also a little bit better. It's definitely not doing as hot as the CPU, but in the 60s, 70s at full tilt, which is not bad. It's kind of what you'd expect from a GPU inside a laptop. On the backdrop of that, I do just want to mention that they have installed dedicated buttons, one of them to crank up the fans all the way to their max RPM, which is quite a useful little tool. And then the other button lets you switch through your RGB profiles on the keyboard. So just quick accessibility there, which is something I've always really liked about their laptops. The last thing I want to mention is the battery life, which is also pretty average and kind of expected with gaming laptops. I mean, batteries aren't designed to power GPUs the whole way through your experience. So it's a given that the battery life is not going to be great. So on idle, the 75 Leopard is roughly between 4 and 5 hours, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to get more than 3 or 3.5 with general usage, and I wouldn't even try and play games with it unplugged because it's not that kind of laptop. Let's be serious. If you're not going to be serious, get the fuck out of here. Anyways, guys, that pretty much wraps it up for this installment of Reality Check. As far as updated iterations of previous editions of their laptops go, this is a serious improvement, but I don't know if that's so much just because of MSI or because of the updated hardware that's inside it, because that i7 1660 Ti combo is mwah, it's beautiful. Anyways, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about the MSI GP75 Leopard. We don't have pricing available for it yet, but as soon as we do, we'll leave it in the comment section or the description below. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you want to see more of this hairy face, which might not be hairy so soon. And I'll catch you guys next time for another installment of Reality Check. Peace! Peace!